Candace Wilson adjusted the ring lamp and glanced at her phone screen. 432 viewers were waiting for her evening stream to begin. The number was slowly growing. People were going live, attracted by the notifications. She smiled into the camera, showing off her flawlessly straight teeth, the result of 2 years of wearing braces in college. "Hello, my beauties!" Candace waved her hand, on which her fuchsia-colored manicure sparkled. Each nail was covered with a gel varnish with tiny glitters that shimmered in the light of the lamp. Today I'm going to show you how to apply contouring correctly for an evening look. I have here a new palette from a famous brand, which was coming to me for a month. Comments sprinkled one after another. Hearts, lights, requests to show the lipstick closer. Candace is used to this kind of attention. In 2 years of blogging, she had almost 50,000 followers. Not bad for a girl from a small town in Wisconsin, where the most popular entertainment was the local high school team's soccer games. She made herself comfortable in the cushioned chair in front of the dressing table. The vintage framed mirror had been inherited from her grandmother, and Candace considered it her talisman. It was near that mirror that she'd first tried putting on makeup when she was 14, secretly from her mother. The result had been disastrous blue shadow up to her eyebrows and bright red lipstick smeared far beyond the contours of her lips. Now every movement of the brush was honed to perfection. "Let's start with cleansing the skin," Candace said, opening a jar of micellar water. "Girls, never put makeup on skin that hasn't been cleansed. It's the foundation of the basics. See how my skin looks? It's the result of proper care and good genetics." She swiped a cotton pad across her face, removing the remnants of her daytime makeup. In the comments, someone wrote, complimenting her skin. Someone asked the name of the moisturizer. Candace felt in her element. Here, in front of the camera, she was confident and successful. Here, her opinion carried weight, and advice was waiting for thousands of girls across the country. Outside the window, October rain drizzled. Droplets dripped down the glass, blurring the lights of the neighboring houses into blurry yellow patches. The streetlights barely shone through the thick veil of rain. Candace loved this kind of weather. Cozy, homey. On such evenings, it was especially pleasant to sit in a warm apartment, wrapped in a soft plaid, chatting with subscribers, feeling needed and important. "Now moisturizer." She squeezed a small amount of white cream with a light floral fragrance onto her palm. "Massage it all over your face. Don't forget the neck. The skin there is thin and requires special care." The phone vibrated with another comment. Notifications appeared on the screen in a continuous stream. "Where is your husband? Haven't seen him on camera in a while." Candace paused for a second, then continued rubbing the cream in a light circular motion. "Damon's at work," she answered briefly, trying to keep her tone lighthearted. "Late shift at the utility company today." It was true. Part of it was. Damon did work for the city's utility company, repairing water mains and cleaning sewer manholes. It was hard, dirty work, but it paid well. However, his shift ended 3 hours ago. Where he'd spent those 3 hours, Candace preferred not to think. Most likely at a happy hour bar on the outskirts of town where the bartender didn't ask too many questions of customers who came to drown their problems in alcohol. "Now the primer." Candace opened a tube of clear foundation. "This will help your makeup last longer and look more natural. Apply a thin layer, paying particular attention to the areas where makeup tended to roll off." She carefully spread the foundation over her face. The mirror reflected the face of a beautiful woman of 33, correct features, expressive brown eyes, full lips. Nature had been generous to her, but Candace knew how to emphasize her strengths and hide her flaws. A small scar on her chin from a childhood injury was skillfully masked with concealer. Slightly asymmetrical eyebrows were corrected with a special pencil. And now my favorite stage, foundation. Candace took out a bottle with a creamy liquid of warm beige shade. "Girls, don't be afraid to experiment with shades. Sometimes a slightly lighter tone can refresh your face, and a slightly darker tone can give you a tanned look." In the comments, Someone thanked for the advice. Someone asked about the price of the makeup. Candace quickly ran her eyes over the posts, answering the most interesting questions. "The price is really high," she admitted honestly. "But I think it's better to have a few quality products than a lot of cheap ones." She began to spread the foundation with a special sponge. Her movements were confident, polished. For 2 years of blogging, Candace had learned to make up quickly and accurately, even under the gaze of hundreds of onlookers. At first, her hands were shaking with excitement. She was confused by the words, "Drop the makeup." Now she felt like a fish in water in front of the camera. See how her skin tone is evened out? She turned her face to the camera from different angles. No blemishes, no redness. The skin looks natural, but flawless. There were sounds outside the door. Someone was coming up the stairs with heavy, uneven steps. Candace recognized the gait, measured but slightly unsure, as if the person wasn't very steady on their feet. Damon was going up to the 4th floor. Her heart raced. Candace tried not to show excitement, but her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the shadow palette. In recent months, her husband's homecoming had become Russian roulette. You never know what mood he's going to be in, sullenly silent or aggressively talkative. "Let's move on to eyeshadow," she said, trying to keep her tone even. "Tonight I'm doing a dramatic chocolate-colored smoky eye. It's my favorite evening look." She took a wide brush and dipped it in light brown shadow. In the comments, someone wrote that she had beautiful hands. Indeed, Candace was meticulous about the condition of her nails and hand skin. Weekly manicure in the salon, daily creams, special masks twice a week. Hands are the business card of the blogger because they are constantly in the frame. The key turned in the front door lock. The sound was sharp, metallic, as if the lock were jamming. Candace heard Damon fumbling in the hallway, dropping something on the floor, cursing in a low voice. From the sounds of it, he was trying to get his work boots off, but his coordination was clearly failing. "So, we're going to apply the base color to the entire mobile eyelid," Candace continued, pretending not to hear anything. "The movements should be light, sweeping movements. Don't press the brush too hard or you'll get a smudge." Something rattled on the floor in the hallway. Most likely Damon had tripped on the threshold or hit a coat rack. Then there were footsteps in the hallway, uneven, shuffling, interspersed with pauses. Candace pressed her lips together and continued to apply the shadows, trying to ignore the noise outside the door. Now for a richer shade, such a beautiful dark brown color, she dipped a smaller brush into the chocolate shadow. Apply to the outer corner of the eye and carefully blend out. This creates depth and expressiveness to the look. In the comments, someone asked if extraneous sounds were interfering with the stream. Candace pretended not to notice the question. She did not want to dedicate subscribers to the problems of her marriage. To them, she was a happily married woman who runs a successful blog and enjoys life. The image of the perfect family brought in extra subscribers. Damon appeared in the bedroom doorway, leaning his shoulder against the jamb. His work jacket was overstained with dirt, machine oil, and something else that looked like rust. His jeans were wet down to his knees. Apparently, he'd had to work in a flooded basement today. His hair was mussed, sticking to his forehead from sweat. He smelled of beer, cheap cigarettes, and something sour and unpleasant. His eyes were reddish, his gaze heavy, a little unfocused. Candace had seen him like this one too many times in the last few months. "It's that damn clown show again," Damon said, nodding at the camera phone. "How many times do I have to show off for these fools?" His voice was hoarse, his words slightly slurred. A commotion started in the comments. Viewers heard a man's voice but did not make out the words in full. Someone wrote, "Show your husband." Someone wrote, "He sounds weird." Someone wrote, "Everything okay at home?" "Hi, honey." Candace turned to him with a strained smile, trying to speak softly so the microphone wouldn't pick up the tension in her voice. "How are things going at work? You look exhausted. Rough day?" "Disgusting." Damon strode into the room, ignoring the camera and the fact that he was being filmed in real time. All day in sewer manholes, knee-deep in shit and dirty water, and you're out here having fun with your little groupies? There was a bitterness in his voice that grew stronger and angrier with each passing month. Once Damon was proud of his blogger wife, bragging to his colleagues that he had a beautiful and successful wife. Showed photos, talked about the number of subscribers. But gradually, pride was replaced by irritation and then outright anger. Candace felt her shoulders tense and her stomach cramped. Question marks and anxious emoticons had already appeared in the comments. The viewers were keenly aware of the changing atmosphere in the frame, the tension almost physically transmitted through the screen. Some started recording what was happening on their devices, intuitively realizing that they might witness something serious and unpleasant. "Damon, I'm working," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice low and calm. "I'm live, and people are watching. Why don't we talk later, when I'm done with the stream?" "Working?" He let out a short laugh full of contempt. "You smear paint all over your face and call it work? Making yourself a star for a bunch of bored housewives and teenagers?" Damon stepped closer, staggering, and Candace saw that his eyes weren't just red, they were bloodshot. His pupils dilated, his gaze restless. It looked like he'd had a lot more to drink tonight than usual, and when Damon was really drunk, he was unpredictable and dangerous. "Oh, please, not now," she whispered, casting a quick glance at the phone screen. "People are watching, taking notes. We can talk quietly after the stream." "Not now? When?" Damon's voice grew louder, more aggressive, more threatening. "You're on that damn phone all day, and you don't have time to talk to me. I work like hell to pay for this apartment, utilities, food, and you play with dolls." The comments flowed in a frenzied stream. "Call the police. Get out of there immediately. The husband is crazy. This is domestic violence. Who knows their address?" Some viewers began to save the tape, realizing that something really serious was going on. The viewer count jumped to 700 people. The news of the live scandal went viral on social media at the speed of light. "Damon, please stop!" Candace tried to get out of the chair, but he was right in front of her, blocking the way to the exit of the room. "You're drunk and out of control. Let's just..." "Stop? You're the one who should stop." He was waving his arms around, and he had a pungent, acrid odor of alcohol mixed with sweat and dirt. "I'm sick of watching you pretend to be a princess. I'm sick of hearing you teach others about beauty when you live in rose-colored glasses." He waved his hand sharply, trying to point at her, and hit the tripod with the phone. The metal structure swayed, the camera tilted, the image distorted and jerked. Now, viewers saw part of the ceiling, the edge of a bed, with a crumpled bedspread, and the distorted, blurred figures of people. Candace reflexively reached for the falling phone, trying to catch the expensive device, but Damon shoved her sharply in the shoulder with both hands. She flew backward in surprise, hitting her back painfully on the sharp edge of the dressing table. "Don't you dare ignore me!" she screamed, and this cry of despair and pain was heard by all 700 spectators who were watching in horror and utter confusion. "Or what? Complain to your fans about your bad husband?" Damon grabbed her wrist, squeezing the thin bones with his fingers so hard that she cried out in sharp pain. "Come on, tell them the whole truth. Tell them what a bad husband I am, how I'm interfering with your blogging career." Candace tried to pull away, jerking her arm and trying to unclench his fingers, but his grip was dead, uncoordinated, but incredibly strong, like all drunk people. The phone was on the floor, screen up, camera still rolling, transmitting a distorted image of the ceiling and scraps of screams mixed in with the noise. "Let go now! You're hurting me!" Candace jerked harder, trying to free her arm, but only made the pain in her wrist worse. "Hurt? Are you in pain?" Damon turned her around to face him, and she saw in his reddened eyes a mixture of pain, anger, despair, and a kind of desperate rage. And what's it like for me to watch you go off into your virtual world every single day and forget that you have a flesh and blood husband? In the comments wrote, "Has anyone called the police yet? Where do they live? Need an address? We need to do something urgently. It will kill her." Several viewers tried to call emergency services at the same time, but no one knew the exact address of the Wilson family, and it was impossible to locate them by their social media nicknames. Candace tried to pull away, to take a step back toward the window, but tripped over the edge of the fluffy white rug that had been beside the bed for years. She lost her balance and swung her free arm, trying desperately to stay on her feet and not fall. Damon reflexively yanked her toward him, trying to help her, but it was too late. The inertia was pulling them both toward the floor. The broadcast continued for another good 10 minutes, transmitting only sounds. The noise of the fall, muffled voices, some strange thudding, then men's exclamations, more like moans. The audience did not understand what exactly was going on behind the scenes, but they all felt that something truly terrible and irreparable had happened. Then there was a long, painful silence. Then the screen suddenly went blank. In the apartment next door, Travis Brown took a break from the evening news on the local TV channel and listened intently to the sounds behind the wall. Behind the thin partition, the Wilsons were fighting again. It had been happening more and more often in the last 6 months, and Travis had long since gotten used to their heated family squabbles. Usually he tried not to interfere in other people's affairs. Each family solved its own internal problems on its own. But today, the screams sounded especially loud, desperate, and somehow especially disturbing. He got up from the couch, walked to the wall separating his one-room apartment from the neighbors, and carefully put his ear to the wallpaper with a small floral pattern. A man's voice, angry, hoarse, drunken. Then a woman's, high, frightened, shouting. Something rumbled heavily, as if a large piece of furniture or a person had fallen. Then another sound, a strange thudding thump. Then a man's groan. And after that, there was complete silence. Travis waited patiently for several more long minutes, but no more sounds came. That was more than strange. Usually, after such a heated argument, Candace would turn up the music or the TV to full volume, trying to drown out her own tears and regain her composure. Damon slammed doors, stomped around the apartment, and sometimes left the house cursing, only to return late at night or in the morning. But today, there was an absolutely dead silence in the apartment, which somehow seemed much more sinister and frightening than the loudest shouts and swearing. Travis Brown dared to knock on his neighbor's door only an hour after the silence had fallen. For the entire hour, he paced around his small apartment, sitting down in front of the television, then getting up again and listening to the sounds behind the wall. The silence was never broken. Travis usually avoided meddling in other people's business. In his 35 years, he'd learned that family problems were best handled without strangers. But something was wrong tonight. The screams sounded too desperate, and the silence that followed seemed unnatural. He stepped out onto the landing and stood in front of the door of apartment number 17 for a few seconds. The nameplate with the name Wilson was screwed on crookedly, one screw having long since fallen out. Travis put his hand to the door, but at the last moment changed his mind about ringing the bell. Instead, he tapped gently with his knuckles. There was no answer. Travis waited and knocked harder. "Candace? Damon?" he called softly. "Is everything okay?" Silence again. Now Travis was worried. He tried the doorknob, but it was locked. So he pulled out his cell phone and dialed the emergency number. "Emergency services, how may I help you?" "Hello?" Travis licked his lips nervously. "I'm worried about my neighbors. They had a very loud argument an hour ago, and then there was complete silence. They won't answer the knock." "What's your name and address?" "Travis Brown, 34 Maple Street, apartment 16. Neighbors live in apartment 17. Is there any reason to suspect someone's been harmed?" Travis hesitated. Technically, there was no reason. Just a strange feeling that something had gone wrong. I don't know, but they don't usually shut up so abruptly after a fight. They don't answer the door. I'm sending a unit. Stand by. The police car arrived 15 minutes later. 2 officers, a young black guy and a woman in her 40s with a tired face, went up to the 4th floor. The woman introduced herself as Sergeant Davis. Did you call the police? She turned to Travis. Yes, I did. Travis pointed to the neighbor's door. There was a loud argument an hour ago, then nothing. No answer when they knocked. Sergeant Davis knocked on the door formally and loudly. Knock on door. Police! Open the door! No answer. Davis looked at her partner and knocked again. Damon Wilson! Candace Wilson! Open up now! The silence was complete. Not even the sound of movement outside the door. We're gonna have to open it, Davis decided. Do you have any reason to believe anyone inside was hurt? I heard screaming, Travis answered. Then a thud, like someone falling. Then it got quiet. The young policeman brought a small crowbar from the car. The lock didn't budge right away, but after a few minutes, the door swung open. Police! Anybody home? Davis shouted as she entered the hallway. The apartment was dark. There was only one light in one room, a thin strip of light under the door. The cops walked cautiously down the hallway. Travis stayed in the hallway. Oh my God, he heard Sergeant Davis's feminine voice. Then his partner said something into the radio, but Travis couldn't make out the words. A few minutes later, Davis came out of the room. Her face was serious. Call the detectives and the medical examiner, she said into the radio. We got a dead body. Detective Isaiah Clark arrived a half hour later. He was a 42-year-old man with a streak in his short-cropped hair and attentive brown eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He wore a dark suit that had clearly seen better days, but was neatly ironed. Clark had worked in the homicide division for 12 years now. He'd seen a lot in that time, but each new case required a fresh set of eyes and a methodical approach. Entering the apartment, he first looked around the hallway. Men's work boots stood by the entrance, one with an untied lace sticking out of it. A jacket hung on a hook, keys lying on the floor beneath it. What do we got? Clark turned to Sergeant Davis. 33-year-old female, Candace Wilson. Found dead in her bedroom. Preliminary head trauma. Clark nodded and made his way to the room where the forensics team was working. Candace was lying on the floor between the bed and the dressing table. Her phone was overturned, her makeup was scattered, and the mirror was cracked. Is the husband home? The detective asked. He's in the kitchen. He said he came home from work and found her dead. Clark scrutinized the scene. There were traces of blood on the sharp corner of the coffee table. Makeup was scattered, but not chaotically, as if someone had tried to find something or give the appearance of a struggle. Where's the neighbor who called the police? He's waiting in the stairwell. Clark walked over to Travis. He looked confused and scared. Tell me exactly what you heard, the detective asked, pulling out a notebook. The fight started an hour ago. It was a common occurrence for them, frankly. Travis rubbed his hands together nervously. But the screaming was especially loud today. Then something rumbled. Then it got quiet. How often did they fight? Almost every week for the last few months. Damon comes in drunk, starts a fight, usually yelling that his wife spends too much time on the internet. Any physical abuse? Travis hesitated. I can't say for sure. I've only heard yelling. But I've seen Candace's arms bruised a couple times. She said she'd fallen. Clark wrote down the statement and went back to the apartment. It was time to talk to her husband. Damon Wilson was sitting at the kitchen table, face pressed into the palms of his hands. He still smelled of alcohol, but now the odor was laced with the smell of fear and sweat. When he heard footsteps, he looked up. Are you the detective? Damon asked. His eyes were red, but not just from the alcohol. He'd obviously been crying. Detective Clark, I need to ask some questions. I don't understand how this could have happened. Damon shook his head. I came home from work, and she was lying on the floor. What time did you get home? About 8 o'clock at night. My shift ended at 5, but I stopped at a bar for a beer. What bar? Happy Hour, on the edge of town. You can check it out, they know me there. Clark wrote down the name. What happened when you got home? Nothing much. I got undressed in the hallway, went into the bedroom. And there, Damon put his hands over his face again. God, there was so much blood. Did you touch the body? Did you move anything? I checked for a pulse. I tried to see if she was breathing, but it was too late. Why didn't you call an ambulance right away? Damon was confused. Confused. I couldn't believe it was possible. I thought it was some kind of nightmare. Clark studied the man's face. Damon looked genuinely shocked, but the detective knew that appearances could be deceiving. How has your relationship with your wife been lately? Normal. Normal. Damon avoided a direct look. Sure, we've had the occasional fight, like all married couples. Neighbors say the arguments were frequent and loud. Travis always exaggerates. We had our disagreements, but nothing serious. Disagreements about what? Her blog, mostly. She spent too much time on the internet. She forgot about her home life, her husband. Damon's voice had a touch of resentment in it. I work physically all day. I come home tired, and she sits in front of the camera and puts on makeup. Clark wrote down every word. The story was beginning to take shape, but important details were still missing. Did you consume alcohol today? A couple beers after work. Nothing like that. The detective sensed that Damon was lying, but he didn't insist just yet. Time will tell the truth. I'm gonna need a list of people who may have had contact with your wife today. I have no idea. She communicated mostly online. Maybe her followers, this friend of hers. What's her name? Roxanne. Roxanne? Roxanne James. They've been friends since high school. She works as a hairdresser at a salon on Main Street. Clark closed his notebook. A tentative picture was beginning to emerge, but there was still a lot that wasn't clear. Mr. Wilson, you may be asked to stay in town for the duration of the investigation. Where am I supposed to go? Damon grinned bitterly. My whole life has been here, with Candace. The detective walked out of the kitchen, leaving Damon in the officer's care. In the bedroom, the experts were finishing up their work. The medical examiner's preliminary report was succinct. Death from head trauma from impact with a hard object. Time of death was approximately 8 p.m. Clark took another close look around the room. Something was bothering him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. The next morning, Detective Clark sat in his office studying the case file. In front of him were the crime scene photos, the preliminary medical examiner's report, and witness statements. But what interested him most was the information he'd gotten from an unexpected source. During the night, the department had received several calls from people who had been watching what was going on in the Wilson apartment in real time. It turned out that Candace was broadcasting live at the time of her death, and several viewers managed to record the last minutes of her life on their devices. The first call came from a 19-year-old student from a neighboring state. The girl sobbed into the phone, explaining that she was a regular viewer of Candace's streams and saw everything that was happening. She had emailed a 4-minute-long videotape. Clark turned on the file on his computer. The recording was made from the student's cell phone screen, and the quality depended on the speed of her internet connection. The image was slow in places, but it was clear enough. Candace's face appeared on the screen. She was saying something about cosmetics, looking calm and confident. Then a man burst into the frame. Damon was clearly drunk, moving unsteadily, speaking aggressively. The detective listened carefully to every word. Phrases about the wife, making a star of herself, forgetting about her husband, smearing paint all over her face, all pointed to a long-standing conflict. The most important moment was when Damon pushed Candace and she tripped on the carpet. The camera had fallen over at that point, and the image was distorted, but the audio continued to record clearly. Clark listened to the final part of the recording several times. The rumble of the fall was heard, then a man's voice, surprised, frightened, then moans, clearly Damon's. The detective made notes in his notebook. The recording didn't give a definite answer as to what exactly had happened, but it showed that Candace's death had occurred during a domestic dispute, not a robbery. The second call came from a teenager in California. The guy explained that he regularly watched Candace's streamings and even tried to call the police during the broadcast, but didn't know the address. His recording was clearer. He had a stable internet connection and a newer phone, but only a minute longer. The third recording came from a middle-aged woman from Texas. She was watching the stream on a high-definition tablet, so her recording was the highest quality of all. It showed facial expressions clearly, especially Candace's terrified face in the last seconds before the camera fell. "Detective Clark?" Sergeant Davis came through the office door. "Roxanne James to see you. A friend of the victim's. Show her in." Roxanne James looked about 29 years old. A skinny black woman in jeans and a light blouse, with a neat haircut and a Bordeaux manicure. Her eyes red from crying, a crumpled handkerchief in her hands. She was wearing a black armband on her sleeve, a sign of mourning for her friend. "Have a seat." Clark pointed to the chair across the table. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." Roxanne sat down and immediately sobbed again. "I still can't believe Candace is gone. The day before yesterday, we were on the phone, making plans for the weekend." "How long did you two know each other?" "We've been friends since the 11th grade. We met in chemistry class, sat at the same desk. We studied together, then I went to college to study cosmetology, and she, journalism. But we always kept in close touch." "Did you talk to her often?" "Every week, for sure. We met, we called, we messaged each other. She would tell me about her blog, show me new cosmetics, and I would tell her about my work in the salon and my clients. We were very close." Clark opened the notebook to the right page. "What do you know about her relationship with her husband?" Roxanne hesitated, twirling her handkerchief in her hands. It was obvious that she was hesitant to tell the truth about her friend's family life. For the last few months, their relationship had been very complicated, tense. "Tell me more." Damon started drinking heavily. At first, just a little, only on weekends or after a particularly hard day at work. Then he came home drunk almost every day. Candace complained that he became a completely different person, aggressive, picky, angry. "Was he physically abusive?" "Several times." Roxanne spoke quietly, as if afraid someone would hear those terrible words. In July, she had a big bruise on her left shoulder. Said Damon had pushed her hard during an argument about money. In August, scratches on her wrist. He squeezed her hand really hard when she tried to leave the room. "Did she go to the police? Complain to anyone officially?" "No, not once. She was very afraid. Said going to the police would only make him angrier, make things worse. Besides, he didn't beat her up all the time. It's just that sometimes when he was really drunk, he'd lose control of himself." Clark wrote down every detail. The picture of gradually escalating domestic violence was becoming clearer and more frightening. What did they usually fight about? Mostly about her blog. Damon thought she spent too much time on the internet, on subscribers. Said she forgot about her family, thinking only about likes and comments. Accused her of living in a virtual world. And how did Candace react to that? Painfully. I mean, the blog was making good money, even more than Damon made at his job. She was paid for advertising cosmetics, participated in partnership programs of different brands. But for some reason, he considered it a frivolous endeavor, a toy. "Did you advise her to do anything about it?" Roxanne cried again, wiping her tears with her soaked handkerchief. "I kept telling her to get away from him, especially after the bruise on his shoulder. I told her that she couldn't live like that sooner or later it could end badly. I even offered her to stay with me for a while." What did she say? That she loved him. That he's not always so angry and aggressive. That when he doesn't drink, he can be a very good, caring husband. Roxanne wiped away her tears and grinned bitterly. She kept hoping that he would stop drinking, that everything would work itself out. Believed in him more than she should have. When was the last time you spoke to Candace? Late night, the night before last. She called me after the stream, very upset, complaining that Damon had come home drunk again and made a scene during the broadcast. Said she couldn't live like that anymore, that she was running out of patience. Did she mention fearing for her life? Did she make any specific threats? Not directly, but I could sense her fear. She said that Damon was becoming more and more unpredictable and aggressive, that sometimes he looks at her like he really hates her for something, like he blames her for all his failures. Clark closed the notebook. Roxanne's testimony clearly supported the theory of systematic domestic violence, but it still didn't explain all the strange circumstances surrounding the death. Thank you for your candor and for your help with the investigation. If you think of anything else of importance, please don't hesitate to call. After Roxanne left, the detective returned to a thorough study of all the case materials. The medical examiner prepared a final conclusion. Death was caused by severe head injury as a result of impact of the occipital part of the head on a hard, sharp object. The nature and localization of the injury was consistent with a fall onto the corner of a coffee table. But as Clark took another close look at the detailed photographs of the scene laid out on the table in chronological order, he noticed several disturbing oddities. For one thing, the makeup was scattered too neatly and thoughtfully. If there had indeed been a chaotic struggle or an accidental fall, the items would have been lying more haphazardly, in different directions. One got the distinct impression that someone had deliberately and methodically scattered them across the floor to create a convincing appearance of disorder and struggle. Secondly, the mirror was cracked in a very strange way. Most of the shards fell strictly to one side, as if the mirror had received a purposeful blow at a very specific point, rather than accidentally shattering during the general commotion. Third, there were subtle but distinct scratches and scuffs on the hardwood floor next to the body that didn't match the soles of either Candace's or Damon's shoes. Shallow but distinct marks on the varnished wood, as if someone had carefully moved heavy furniture or dragged something across the floor. Clark decided to immediately make another trip to the crime scene for a more detailed and methodical inspection. The Wilsons' apartment remained sealed, but the detective had a service key. He wanted to check out his growing suspicions personally and very thoroughly. The bedroom greeted him with an oppressive silence and the pungent smell of the chemical disinfectant the forensics team had used to treat the crime scene. White chalk lines on the dark parquet floor clearly marked the contours of the body, and numerous stains of dried blood were marked with yellow plastic markers with numbers. Clark slowly squatted down next to the massive coffee table and examined its sharp corner millimeter by millimeter. The traces of blood were extremely clear and abundant. It had indeed been the weapon that had inflicted the fatal injury. But the angle of the dried sweat and spatter seemed quite wrong to the detective. He stood to his full height and tried to replicate Candace's fall as accurately as possible, using detailed data from the spectator's cell phone videos. If she had indeed tripped over the edge of the rug near the bed and fallen toward the table, then her trajectory and final point of impact had to be completely different. The detective took out a tape measure and carefully measured all distances, made detailed notes, and even small diagrams in his work notebook. The math stubbornly didn't add up. There was no way Candace could have fallen with such force and at such an angle as to have been fatally injured in the exact spot and position in which her body had been found. Clark carefully examined the fluffy white carpet. There were indeed obvious signs of a struggle on it, heavily crumpled areas, a few small dark spots of dried blood, even handprints. But the main, massive bleeding was near the coffee table, a good 2.5 meters from the carpet. Gradually, the seasoned detective was forming a whole new, much darker version of the events that had taken place. Perhaps Candace's death had really been an accident during another drunken brawl, but Damon had clearly tried to dramatically change the picture of the incident, to stage a robbery or an accidental fall in order to completely hide the irrefutable facts of systematic domestic violence. That would logically explain the extremely strange and unnatural arrangement of scattered makeup, the purposefully damaged mirror, and the mysterious marks on the parquet floor. Damon might well have been in a state of panic, trying to drastically change the whole picture of the incident in order to avoid being accused of murdering his own wife. But a host of important questions still remained unanswered. Why hadn't he called emergency medical services immediately after the incident? How much precious time had passed between Candace's actual death and the arrival of the first police squad? And the biggest, most frightening question: was the young woman's death really a tragic accident? The next morning, Detective Clark summoned Damon Wilson to the station for a second interrogation. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. Not a sympathetic conversation with a distraught widower, but a serious investigation with a suspect. Damon looked worse than he had 2 days ago, unshaven, in a crumpled shirt with reddened eyes. His hands shook slightly, whether from nerves or lack of alcohol. He sat down across from the detective in a small interview room with nothing but a table, 2 chairs, and a recording machine on. "Mr. Wilson," Clark began, spreading out the case file in front of him, "I have a few additional questions about the events of the night before last. I've already told you everything." Damon rubbed his palms nervously against his jeans. "Came home, found Candace dead, called the police. What else do you want to know?" "You didn't actually call the police." The detective opened the notebook to the right page. "The call came from your neighbor Travis Brown at 21 hours and 37 minutes. He was concerned about a loud argument and the subsequent silence." Damon blinked, clearly not expecting this turn of events. "Yeah, that's right. I was in shock, couldn't think straight. Good thing Travis was vigilant." "Mr. Wilson, we have video footage of the last few minutes of your wife's life." Clark pulled out a clipboard and set it on the table. Several viewers of her stream had recorded what was happening on their devices. Damon's face went white. He stared at the black screen of the tablet as if it might explode. What does it show?" he whispered. "It shows you coming home drunk, getting aggressive with your wife, pushing her around." Clark spoke calmly, but every word was like a hammer blow. "You can hear her screaming, asking you to stop. But it's not what you think." Damon frantically gripped the edge of the table. "Yes, we had a fight, but I didn't mean to kill her. It was an accident." "Then why did you lie in your first statement? Why did you say you found her already dead?" Damon covered his face with his hands and was silent for a few seconds. Then he slowly raised his head. "I was scared. Realized how it would look. Drunken husband, domestic violence, dead wife. Who would believe me that it was an accident?" Clark turned on his tablet and launched one of the recordings. Candace's voice calm at the beginning, then frightened. Damon's voice, angry, aggressive. Sounds of a struggle. "Tell me what happened after the camera fell," the detective asked. Damon took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I pushed her, and she tripped on the carpet and fell, hit her head on the table." He spoke in a monotone, like he was retelling a story. "She bled right away. I knew something terrible had happened." "What did you do next?" "I tried first aid, checked his pulse, his breathing, but it was too late. She died almost instantly." "Why didn't you call an ambulance?" "I knew the doctors wouldn't be able to help. And then I panicked. I started thinking about what to do next." Clark took notes, watching Damon's reactions closely. "Explain the oddities at the scene. Why was the makeup scattered so neatly? Why was the mirror broken purposefully?" Damon covered his face with his hands again. "I was trying to change the picture, make it look like a robbery. Scattered the makeup, broke the mirror. I thought it would be more believable." "How long between your wife's death and when the police arrived?" "About an hour. Maybe a little more." "An hour you were covering up evidence?" "No," Damon raised his head sharply. "For the first half hour I just sat next to her and cried. I couldn't believe she was dead. Then I started panicking, wondering what I should do." Clark studied the expression on the suspect's face. Damon looked genuinely shocked, but the detective knew that even murderers could feel remorse. "Mr. Wilson, I have reason to believe that your wife's death was not accidental." "What?" Damon straightened up. "What are you talking about?" "The forensics showed inconsistencies. The trajectory of the fall doesn't match the nature of the injuries. Candace couldn't have gotten that injury just by tripping on the carpet." "But I explained what happened." "Your explanation doesn't match the physical evidence." The detective pulled out the crime scene photos and laid them out in front of Damon. "See these bloodstains? This angle? Your wife was struck with far more force than a simple fall would produce." Damon stared at the pictures for a long time. You could see in his face how he was thinking feverishly. "Maybe she didn't fall the way I remember. Everything was happening really fast. I was drunk. Or maybe you hit her on purpose." "No!" Damon jumped up from his chair. "I never meant to kill her. Yes, I pushed her sometimes when I lost control, but I never wanted to kill her. Never." "Sit down," Clark said calmly. "We have evidence of persistent domestic violence. Your wife was afraid of you." "Roxanne told you," Damon said sullenly, sitting down again. "That bitch was always turning Candace against me. Roxanne told the truth. About the bruises, the scratches, about Candace wanting to leave you. She wasn't going anywhere." Damon's voice turned to anger. "Roxanne was just messing with her head, saying stupid things." "So you knew about her plans to leave you?" Damon realized he'd been caught in his own words. Sometimes in arguments, she'd yelled that she was leaving. But they were just words. She loved me. Enough to make you angry enough to go to extremes? "I didn't kill her on purpose." Damon pounded his fist on the table. "Damn it, you're not listening to me." Another officer peered into the room, but Clark gestured that everything was under control. "Then explain exactly how Candace died." Damon was silent for a long moment, struggling with himself. Then he spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "We got in a fight over her stream. I was really drunk and angry. I grabbed her arm, and she tried to pull away. Then I pushed her really hard. I didn't have the right amount of force. She flew backwards, but not to the carpet. To the table, the back of her head hit the corner." Damon swallowed. "I knew right away that something terrible had happened. There was a lot of blood." "Why didn't you confess to it right away?" "I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. They'd think I killed her on purpose." Clark spent a long time reviewing the records, cross-referencing the new testimony with the evidence. "Mr. Wilson, you're under arrest for suspicion of murder. You have the right to an attorney." "But I told the truth. It was an accident." "That's for the court to decide." The trial took place 3 months later in district court. Damon's lawyer insisted on a version of involuntary manslaughter, citing the state of alcohol intoxication and the lack of motive for a planned murder. The prosecutor, on the other hand, presented evidence of systematic domestic violence and argued that Damon acted consciously. Streaming video footage was a key piece of evidence. The jury heard Candace's screams, saw Damon's aggression. Testimony from Roxanne and neighbors painted a picture of escalating domestic violence. Forensics confirmed that the nature of the injuries indicated a significant force of impact beyond that of a simple fall. Damon could only have pushed his wife with such force on purpose. The jury deliberated for 2 days. In the end, they found Damon Wilson guilty of second-degree murder. The court sentenced him to 15 years in prison. The verdict was announced to a packed auditorium. Roxanne was crying in the front row. Damon listened to the decision without emotion, as if he'd already accepted the inevitable. Detective Clark watched the proceedings from the audience. For him, the case was another reminder of how thin the line between family conflict and tragedy was. Candace Wilson might still be alive if she'd sought help in time. But now it was too late.